The soft hum of jet engines filled the air as passengers rushed through Terminal 4, juggling coffee cups, boarding passes, and last-minute phone calls. In the middle of the chaos stood a tall, sharply dressed man, calm, collected, and quietly powerful. His name was Darius Cole, though few recognized him. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to announce his status. His confidence came not from designer suits or flashy watches, but from years of building an empire from the ground up. His luggage, a simple black leather suitcase, rolled beside him like an old friend, elegant, understated, and worth more than most could guess. As he reached the gate, the line moved slowly. A frustrated flight attendant in a crisp uniform barked orders at the crowd, her tone sharp with exhaustion and superiority. Her name tag read Rebecca Hale, and she had worked for Skyward Airlines for nearly a decade. She prided herself on efficiency, but lately her patience had been wearing thin. When Darius approached, she barely looked up. She glanced at his casual blazer and simple carry-on, immediately assuming he was an economy passenger trying to sneak into first class. When the man in front of Darius stumbled slightly, Rebecca turned to adjust an overhead compartment. Darius stepped forward quietly, placing his suitcase neatly above his assigned seat in the first-class cabin. But as Rebecca turned back, her eyes narrowed. Without hesitation, she snapped, "Sir, this space is for priority passengers only." And before Darius could respond, she used her foot to shove his suitcase aside with a loud thud. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Every head turned. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick, uncomfortable, electric. Darius looked at her, his expression unreadable. His deep voice broke the stillness, calm yet commanding. "I am a priority passenger." His tone carried no anger, no arrogance, just truth. Rebecca blinked, her cheeks flushing, but instead of apologizing, she scoffed, "Then you should act like one." She turned on her heel, unaware that the man she had just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. He was the chief executive officer of Cole Technologies International, one of the largest corporate partners of her airline's parent company. And with that one careless act, her career had just begun to unravel. Pause beat cinematic narration. Welcome to Swift Tale, the channel where stories of power, pride, and poetic justice come alive. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story will make you question how far respect really goes when nobody's watching. Tell me, what would you do if someone judged you not by your accomplishments, but by your appearance? Would you stay calm like Darius, or would you fight back? Today's story isn't just about an incident on a plane. It's about how judgment, arrogance, and hidden bias can destroy a career in seconds, and how quiet dignity can command more power than any outburst ever could. As we follow Darius's journey, you'll see how a single moment of disrespect turned into a lesson for an entire industry. You'll see how one calm man changed the meaning of power, not through anger, but through action. And most of all, you'll see that sometimes the strongest statement is the one made in silence. This story matters because what happened on that flight could happen anywhere, in a boardroom, a store, a restaurant, or an airport terminal. It reminds us that respect isn't a privilege, it's a choice, one that can build or break a life in an instant. So sit back, stay tuned, and prepare yourself, because what happened next will prove that true power doesn't need a loud voice. It just needs one phone call. The story of Darius Cole didn't begin in a corporate boardroom or on a private jet. It began on the worn-out streets of Detroit, in a one-bedroom apartment where his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. As a boy, Darius learned early that the world doesn't hand out respect, you earn it, and sometimes you fight for it quietly. His father, a mechanic, taught him discipline. His mother, a nurse, taught him compassion. Between oil stains and late-night study sessions, Darius learned that humility and hard work were the foundation of real power. By the time he was 35, Darius had turned his small tech startup into a billion-dollar powerhouse, Cole Technologies International, a company that revolutionized airline software, data security, and passenger management systems worldwide. His face rarely appeared in magazines, and he didn't chase publicity. To him, success meant creating change without needing credit. But that humility often meant he was underestimated, something he neither feared nor corrected. That morning, Darius had an important meeting in New York City, a negotiation that would finalize a global contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The deal involved Skyward Airlines, one of the largest carriers in North America. His team had prepared for months. Every second mattered. But Darius, as always, moved at his own pace, unbothered by chaos. He arrived at the airport early, wearing a simple navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and sneakers, nothing flashy, just functional elegance. People brushed past him without a second glance. A few businessmen in line looked him over, one even stepped ahead of him, assuming Darius was waiting for economy check-in. He didn't say a word. He'd seen it all before. At the gate, the atmosphere buzzed with irritation. The flight was overbooked, passengers were anxious, and flight attendants looked stressed. Rebecca Hale, the lead attendant, had already dealt with 3 complaints that morning. Her patience was threadbare. To her, first-class passengers represented her last bit of order, a place of calm professionalism where she could breathe. When Darius approached, she barely noticed his boarding group or ticket class. She noticed only the man, tall, black, dressed simply, and in her exhausted mind, she made an assumption that would cost her everything. "Sir, you'll have to wait," she said, her tone clipped as she waved him aside without checking his pass. Darius gave a polite nod, stepping back silently. The passengers behind him fidgeted impatiently, sighing and muttering under their breath. The moment passed, but the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. When boarding resumed, Darius entered the jet bridge, scrolling through emails on his phone. His assistant had messaged him. "Good luck, boss. Remember, this deal is bigger than numbers. It's about how they see us." He smiled faintly, unaware of how prophetic those words would soon become. Inside the aircraft, he placed his black leather suitcase neatly in the first-class overhead compartment. It was an ordinary action, one he'd done countless times before, but to Rebecca Hale, watching from across the cabin, it looked like defiance. She stormed over, irritation flashing in her eyes, and with one swift motion, thud, she kicked the suitcase out of place. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. The passengers fell silent. A businessman glanced up, a child stopped mid-sentence, and a flight attendant standing nearby winced. Darius turned his head slowly, his gaze calm but sharp, meeting hers. "That's my seat," he said softly. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be loud to be felt. Rebecca blinked, then stammered, "Oh, well, you should have said something." But her tone still held a trace of condescension, as if his calmness offended her more than if he'd shouted. Darius said nothing else. He simply straightened his jacket and sat down, but the eyes of everyone around told the story for him. Some looked embarrassed, others simply uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that this small moment, this seemingly insignificant act of arrogance, would ripple far beyond that plane, reaching boardrooms, news networks, and millions of screens around the world. Outside the window, rain began to fall, light, steady, cleansing. The engines roared to life as the flight prepared for takeoff. Darius leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and exhaled. He had a deal to close, but he also knew that fate had just written a different kind of meeting for him, one that had nothing to do with contracts or technology, and everything to do with respect. The plane ascended smoothly through the morning clouds, the city shrinking below like a mosaic of lights and movement. The hum of the engines was steady, a rhythmic reminder that for the next few hours, every passenger was trapped in the same metal tube, no escape, no retreat. For most, it was just another flight. But for Darius Cole, this flight would mark the beginning of a story that the world wouldn't soon forget. Rebecca Hale moved briskly through the aisles, the scent of coffee and perfume trailing behind her as she performed the same routines she had done thousands of times before. Yet something about this particular morning gnawed at her, the embarrassment from earlier, when the calm black man had quietly corrected her, still lingered. She didn't like being wrong, and she liked being questioned even less. In her mind, Darius's composure was a challenge, a quiet rebuke that unsettled her more than any angry outburst could have. As the seatbelt light flicked off, Rebecca returned to the first-class cabin, tray in hand, her expression locked in professional detachment. "Coffee or juice?" she asked each passenger, her voice clipped but rehearsed. When she reached Darius, she hesitated. He looked up from his tablet, his deep voice calm. "Black coffee, please." The irony wasn't lost on her. She poured it, avoiding his eyes, and moved on quickly, but the damage was already done. Across the aisle, a businessman whispered to his companion, "You saw what happened earlier, right? That was out of line. His friend nodded. The whispers spread quietly like a secret fire. The atmosphere shifted. Even the flight attendants could feel it, a subtle change, an unspoken discomfort that weighed on every exchange. As the flight cruised at 30,000 feet, Darius leaned back, reviewing documents for the meeting ahead. His screen glowed with the company logo, Cole Technologies International, bold and unmistakable. The passenger beside him noticed and raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, are you the Darius Cole?" he asked. Darius looked over, gave a polite nod, and replied, "Yes, I am." That moment didn't go unnoticed. Another attendant who had overheard froze, her eyes widened, and she glanced toward Rebecca. Rebecca, you might want to come here for a second," she whispered nervously. Rebecca frowned, annoyed, and walked over. The other attendant subtly pointed at Darius's screen. When Rebecca's eyes landed on the glowing company logo, the realization hit her like a thunderclap. Cole Technologies. The same company her airline had recently announced a massive tech partnership with, a deal that the CEO himself was rumored to be personally overseeing. Her chest tightened, her earlier words, "This space is for priority passengers only," echoed in her mind like a slap. Her stomach churned. She tried to compose herself, straightening her jacket, and forced a tight smile as she approached Darius again. "Mr. Cole," she began softly, "I just wanted to make sure everything's comfortable for you. Can I get you anything else?" Darius looked up, his gaze calm and measured. "No, thank you, I'm fine." His tone was polite, but his eyes held something else, not anger, but disappointment, the kind that pierces deeper than any insult. Rebecca lingered awkwardly for a second too long, hopping for a sign of forgiveness, but Darius simply turned back to his screen. The conversation was over before it began. Hours passed, the cabin dimmed for the in-flight meal, and the world outside turned into endless skies of orange and gold. Rebecca moved mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Every time she passed Darius's seat, she felt a pang of guilt. She thought about all the times she had made snap judgments, the tired mother she'd rolled her eyes at, the old man she'd brushed off. But this time was different. This time she disrespected someone who not only deserved better, but had the power to expose her behavior to the world. Darius, meanwhile, sat in silence, his mind torn between restraint and principle. He had experienced discrimination before in meetings, on sidewalks, in restaurants, but something about this public humiliation stung differently, not because it hurt his pride, but because it reminded him how far society still had to go. Yet deep down, he knew revenge wasn't the answer. Justice, though, that was something he understood well. As the plane began its descent, a calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly in New York. Please return your seats to the upright position." Rebecca made one last pass down the aisle. When she reached Darius, their eyes met briefly. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Darius gave her a courteous nod, the kind of polite acknowledgement that stung more than anger ever could. He wasn't going to argue, he wasn't going to cause a scene, he was simply going to remember. And once the wheels touched the ground, one phone call would change everything, not out of revenge, but out of principle. Because when a man like Darius Cole decides to act, it's never impulsive, it's intentional. The engines roared as the plane landed, the cabin filling with applause from anxious travelers. But for Rebecca Hale, the sound was hollow. She didn't know it yet, but her life and her career had just crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The moment the plane touched down, it seemed as though the cabin itself exhaled. The passengers stirred. Seatbelts clicked, phones came alive again. To most, it was just the end of a long flight. But for Rebecca Hale, every sound was a reminder of her mistake. She smiled mechanically as she gave landing instructions, yet her palms were damp and her heart beat uneven. The quiet, composed man in seat 2A had barely said a word after she'd realized who he was, and that silence was far heavier than any confrontation could have been. Throughout the descent, passengers whispered among themselves. A few had caught everything on their phones. One man muttered, "That's Darius Cole, Cole Technologies, right? The airline's new partner?" His friend nodded. The murmurs grew until Rebecca felt eyes on her from every direction. She straightened her posture, forcing professionalism back into her gestures, but inside she was unraveling. Darius remained still. He placed his tablet into the same black suitcase she'd kicked earlier, fastened the latch, and looked out the window at the runway lights streaking by. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about balance, about how the world rarely gives you the chance to correct injustice with grace. He believed in timing, and his timing was always deliberate. As the aircraft rolled to the gate, Rebecca finally approached him. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "Mr. Cole, I just wanted to apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier. It's been a stressful morning." He looked up slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. "I understand stressful mornings," he said quietly. "What matters is how we treat people when we're having them." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He turned his gaze back to the window, signaling that the conversation was over. Rebecca stood there for a heartbeat longer, then retreated toward the galley, her throat tightening. A nearby passenger leaned over and whispered, "Handled it better than most would." Darius pretended not to hear. He didn't need validation. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. When the doors opened, first-class passengers began to file out. Darius waited until the aisle was nearly empty before standing. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, every step echoing quiet authority. Rebecca stood at the exit, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Have a good day, sir," she said softly. Darius paused beside her. "You too," he replied. Then, with a hint of warmth that almost disguised the weight of his words, he added, "Take care of yourself." He walked away without looking back. Rebecca exhaled, trying to convince herself it was over. But as she turned to gather the final items from the seats, she caught a glimpse of passengers scrolling through their phones, her own face staring back from shaky videos. One clip had already been posted with the caption, "Flight attendant kicks black man's luggage in first class, then learns who he is." Her stomach dropped. The video was spreading fast. Outside the gate, Darius's driver was waiting with a quiet nod. As they walked toward the exit, his assistant called, "Sir, I saw something online. Are you okay?" Darius answered evenly, "Perfectly fine, but tell James we'll need to review Skyward's partnership terms this week." "Everything all right?" "Not yet," Darius said, "but it will be." Back inside the airport, Rebecca sat alone at the crew station, the chatter of departing passengers fading behind her. Her phone buzzed with notifications, friends sending links, colleagues texting, "Is this you?" Her throat closed as she watched the video replay, her own foot kicking that suitcase, her own voice snapping with arrogance. She saw herself the way the world would see her, impatient, dismissive, cruel. She wanted to call her supervisor, to explain, to beg for understanding. But what could she possibly say? The truth was simple and sharp. She'd let her assumptions dictate her behavior, and now those assumptions were public record. Meanwhile, Darius sat in the back seat of his car, the city skyline rising ahead. He wasn't angry, he was thoughtful. He understood that this wasn't just about one woman's behavior, it was about an entire culture that still judged worth by skin, by dress, by silence. He didn't want her humiliation, he wanted change. And change, he knew, began with accountability. He looked down at his phone, his finger hovering over a single contact, James Porter, chief executive of Skyward Airlines. The man had been courting Darius's company for months, promising inclusivity and equality as part of their public image. Darius smiled faintly. "Let's see how much those promises mean when tested," he murmured. As the car merged into traffic, the city lights reflected against the glass, half gold, half shadow. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The next morning, the city of New York woke beneath a veil of rain. Glass towers reflected the gray sky, and taxis hissed over wet pavement. In an office overlooking Midtown, Darius Cole stood by the window, coffee in hand, his reflection framed against the skyline he had helped shape. He looked calm, but inside his thoughts were sharp, focused, deliberate. The video from the flight had already reached millions overnight. It was everywhere, news blogs, social media feeds, even morning shows. But Darius hadn't spoken a word publicly. He didn't need to. His assistant, Maya, walked in quietly. "Sir, Skyward Airlines' PR team just released a statement. They're saying they're investigating the incident. Darius nodded without turning from the window. The usual deflection, he murmured. They won't act unless they're reminded what's at stake. He set the coffee down, picked up his phone, and scrolled through his contacts until he found one name: James Porter, the CEO of Skyward Airlines. James was an old acquaintance, a man who had built his career on charm and strategy, and who often talked about diversity and brand integrity in the same breath. They had shared dinner meetings, handshakes, and contracts worth hundreds of millions, but today's call would not be friendly. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, before a voice answered, cheerful but wary. Darius, I was just about to reach out. I assume this is about the... Yes, Darius interrupted, his tone even but unmistakably firm. It's about the flight. There was a pause. James sighed. I saw the footage. Unacceptable, obviously, but you know how social media exaggerates. Exaggerates? Darius's voice stayed low, but every word carried weight. She kicked my luggage, accused me of not belonging in a seat I paid for, on your plane, while your company parades slogans about equality and customer dignity. James stammered, Darius, of course, it's awful, we're taking it seriously, HR's involved. Darius turned from the window, his expression unreadable. James, I'm not looking for a statement, I'm looking for accountability. You and I have a contract negotiation pending. My company provides your booking and operations systems. That partnership is due for renewal next month. You tell me, how much is your airline's reputation worth? Silence filled the line. The sound of distant rain pressed softly against the windows. James finally spoke, quieter now. You're saying you want her fired? No, Darius replied. I want her educated. I want her to understand the weight of what she did, not just to me, but to what I represent. She didn't insult a CEO. She insulted every person who's ever been told they didn't belong in first class, in boardrooms, in power. That's the problem you need to fix. James exhaled, relieved. We'll make it right, Darius. I promise you that. Darius's tone softened slightly. I believe you will, but make sure you don't just protect your image, protect your values. He ended the call. No anger, no satisfaction, just certainty. Within hours, Skyward Airlines' internal communication channels buzzed like a hornet's nest. Executives called emergency meetings. HR launched an official review. The video was now headline news. Flight attendant confronts black CEO in first class. Company under fire for discrimination. Rebecca Hale sat at home, her uniform folded neatly on her bed, eyes swollen from crying. She hadn't left the apartment since the airline's legal team called. We need to speak, they'd said flatly. She watched the news replay her humiliation in slow motion, her own voice, her own arrogance on loop. Her phone buzzed. A message from her supervisor read. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. HR will contact you tomorrow. She set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. Tears came easily now, not because of the job, but because of the realization she had seen the man, not the person. She had assumed, judged, dismissed. Across town, Darius sat in his boardroom surrounded by his senior staff. His company was buzzing with reporters' calls, but he waved them off. No statements, he said. We don't shame people, we change systems. Maya looked at him curiously. So what now? Darius glanced at her, his voice calm but commanding. Now we build something that prevents this from happening again, to anyone. He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. Skyward will make this right, not by punishing one woman, but by fixing the culture that created her behavior. That night, as the city lights flickered against the rain-streaked windows of his penthouse office, Darius made one more call, not to a friend or a lawyer, but to his foundation's director. Set up a meeting, he said. I want to start a program for equality training, real empathy-based education, not just policy checklists. Call it the Cole Initiative. Let's see if Skyward's willing to partner. The director paused. You think they'll agree? Darius smiled faintly. They won't have a choice. And just like that, the ripple of one act, a single moment of arrogance and disrespect began to spread. It was no longer just a viral story, it was becoming a movement. Because when a man like Darius Cole makes a call, it isn't just about power, it's about purpose. By dawn, the story had broken the internet. Every news outlet, talk show, and social media page was buzzing with headlines. Flight attendant confronts Black CEO in first class. Skyward Airlines faces backlash. Disrespect in the skis, the viral video that shook corporate America. Clips of the incident played on loop, Rebecca's dismissive tone, the sound of her foot hitting the suitcase, the stunned silence afterward. The image of Darius Cole, standing calm and composed amid the chaos, became a symbol of quiet strength. Hashtags like Respect in the Air and Darius Cole trended worldwide. Influencers, journalists, and everyday travelers weighed in. Some were furious, others were reflective, but everyone was talking. On Twitter, one post stood out. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He just looked her in the eye and made a call that changed everything. That's what real power looks like. Within hours, it had over 2 million likes. Skyward Airlines scrambled to contain the storm. Their PR team worked through the night, drafting apologies, monitoring comments, and trying to shape a narrative. But the internet had already decided this wasn't just about one rude flight attendant. It was about systemic disrespect, bias, and arrogance that hid beneath uniforms and corporate smiles. At Skyward's headquarters, executives filled the boardroom. Screens flashed social media feeds, news headlines, and graphs showing a steep drop in stock value. James Porter, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, eyes weary but sharp. "We're losing credibility by the hour," he said, voice strained. "Every diversity promise we ever made looks hollow right now." The head of PR cleared her throat nervously. "We've drafted a public apology and offered to meet with Mr. Cole privately." "Not good enough," James interrupted. "Darius doesn't care about apologies, he cares about integrity." A young communications officer hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there's also talk that Mr. Cole's foundation might be planning an initiative on workplace respect. They're calling it the Cole Initiative. It's already trending before it's even launched." James leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Of course it is. He's turning this into a message, and frankly, he's right." Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across the city, Rebecca sat motionless on her couch. The blinds were drawn. Her phone lay face down on the table, buzzing endlessly with notifications. Friends, co-workers, and even strangers had messaged her, some with sympathy, most with outrage. Her name had become a curse online. Every channel replayed her mistake, every headline painted her as the villain of the skis. She watched one interview on TV, a panel discussing workplace discrimination. A journalist said, "This isn't about race alone. It's about how people in service roles sometimes assume authority without compassion." This man was calm, respectful, yet humiliated publicly. It's a mirror for all of us. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "What have I done?" For the first time, she wasn't angry, she was ashamed. She thought back to that moment on the plane, the way she hadn't even looked at Darius properly, the way she'd spoken down to him. The realization hit her like turbulence. It wasn't just about a suitcase. It was about the years of bias she'd never questioned, the subtle superiority she'd carried without even noticing. Across town, at Cole Technologies, Darius's staff watched the story unfold too. Maya scrolled through the comments, shaking her head. "People are really standing behind you, sir. You've become a symbol of grace under pressure." Darius gave a faint smile. "Symbols fade," he said quietly, "but actions last." He walked into his office and stood by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "Maya, set up a press conference for next week, but make it clear I'm not there to gloat. I'm there to talk about change." Maya nodded. "You think the airline will cooperate?" "They'll have to," Darius replied. "This isn't just about them anymore. It's about every company that hides behind apologies instead of accountability." That evening, talk shows lit up with debates. Some defended the flight attendant, saying she was stressed, overworked, or misjudged the situation. Others pointed out how bias often hides behind excuses. Psychologists, activists, and corporate trainers weighed in. But one interview stood above the rest, a short clip of Darius walking calmly past a swarm of reporters, saying only, "This isn't about revenge, it's about respect. We can't teach empathy through punishment, but we can through understanding." Those words echoed everywhere. They played on morning news programs, spread across social feeds, and were quoted in op-eds. Even those who had never experienced such discrimination felt the message hit home. By nightfall, Skyward Airlines released an official statement. "We deeply regret the incident involving our employee and Mr. Darius Cole. We are reviewing our training policies and have reached out to Mr. Cole to collaborate on a new initiative promoting respect, inclusion, and dignity in customer service." The world saw the apology, but Darius saw something more, a chance to redefine the conversation. Meanwhile, Rebecca, still suspended, received an email from HR. "Mandatory meeting scheduled for Monday. Please attend for evaluation and next steps." She stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure if she had the strength to face it. But deep down, she knew this was her moment of truth, to learn, to change, and maybe to start again. And so, as the city lights shimmered and the storm outside began to fade, a new storm, one of reflection, change, and accountability, was just beginning. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was listening. Monday morning arrived with an eerie calm. The sun had just begun to rise over the glass skyline, spilling golden light into the streets below. The storm had passed, but in the hearts of those involved, the tension remained heavy. In a quiet conference room on the 15th floor of Skyward Airlines headquarters, Rebecca Hales sat alone. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a paper cup of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. The once-proud flight attendant, who strutted through first-class aisles with authority, now sat small, silent, and uncertain. The hum of air conditioning filled the space until the door opened. James Porter, the CEO, entered with 2 HR executives and a representative from legal. Their expressions were unreadable, professional, distant, yet tinged with discomfort. Rebecca rose to her feet quickly, her voice shaky. "Thank you for meeting with me, sir." James nodded curtly. "Please sit down." He set a folder on the table, its contents neatly arranged, printed news articles, screenshots of tweets, and her employee record. "Rebecca, you know why you're here." She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I made a terrible mistake. I disrespected a passenger. I—" "Not just any passenger," the HR officer interrupted softly. "A major corporate partner and one of the most respected CEOs in the country." Rebecca's eyes welled up. "I didn't know who he was. I swear I wasn't trying to." James raised a hand to stop her. "That's exactly the problem, Rebecca. You didn't know, you didn't care to, you judged him before he said a word." The words cut deeper than she expected. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been on so many flights, sir. People try to sneak into first class all the time. I thought he was just another one of them. I was wrong. I know that now." The HR officer leaned forward gently. "This isn't just about policy, Rebecca. It's about how we treat people, all people. You've worked here for almost a decade. You should know better." A long silence followed. Then James spoke again, quieter this time. "Mr. Cole has made his position clear. He doesn't want you fired." Rebecca blinked, stunned. "He does." James shook his head. "No, in fact, he's requested something quite different. He's launching something called the Cole Initiative. It's a joint program focused on empathy and inclusion training for airline staff. He's offered to partner with us directly, but under one condition." Her voice trembled. "What condition?" "That you," James said slowly, "be the first to attend. And not just attend, participate, learn, and later help lead sessions for other staff." Rebecca stared at him, speechless. She had expected anger, punishment, maybe even dismissal. But this was something she hadn't imagined, a second chance. James continued, his tone softening. "Mr. Cole believes that real change doesn't come from firing people, it comes from opening eyes. You've become the face of a mistake, but you can also become the face of redemption if you're willing to do the work. Tears rolled down Rebecca's cheeks. I don't deserve that kind of grace. James leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Maybe not, but he's offering it anyway. The question is, what will you do with it? Rebecca took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do it, whatever it takes. Meanwhile, across town, Darius Cole sat in his office, reviewing documents for the new initiative. His team had already coordinated with Skyward's executives, and a pilot program was being developed for staff across the company. Maya entered, holding a folder. The meeting with their HR department went well. Rebecca agreed to participate. Darius didn't look up from his work. Good. She seemed remorseful, Maya added, genuinely. Darius paused, finally looking up. Remorse is a start, but growth is the goal. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. People make mistakes every day. The real measure is what they do once they see the truth. Later that week, the first Cole Initiative session was held at Skyward's training facility. The room was filled with flight attendants, pilots, and supervisors, all watching curiously as Darius took the stage. Dressed simply in a grey suit, he didn't look like a CEO giving a lecture. He looked like a man who wanted to talk. He began quietly. What happened on Flight 308 wasn't an isolated moment. It was a mirror showing us how quickly we can forget to see the human being in front of us. He spoke not with anger but with purpose. He told stories about times he'd been judged, dismissed, underestimated, about how easy it is to act superior without realizing it. Every word resonated, and when he turned toward the audience, his eyes found Rebecca. She met his gaze nervously. For a brief moment, the air between them felt heavy with memory. Then Darius gave a small, understanding nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. After the session, Rebecca approached him quietly. Mr. Cole, she began, voice shaking, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. I don't deserve this chance. Darius looked at her evenly. You don't thank me, Ms. Hale. You use the chance to make sure no one else makes the same mistake. She nodded, her voice cracking. I will. He offered a faint smile. Good. That's how change begins, not with perfection, but with awareness. As he walked away, Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a mix of guilt, gratitude, and determination. She knew she couldn't erase what she'd done, but she could make sure it mattered. Back in his car, Darius looked out the window as the city lights blurred past. Maya sat beside him. Do you think she'll really change? She asked. Darius smiled faintly. I think she already has. And with that, the story that began with a single act of arrogance was slowly transforming into something far greater. A story of accountability, redemption, and humanity. Because sometimes, the most powerful victory isn't when you make someone pay. It's when you make them learn. The following weeks felt surreal for Rebecca Hale. Every morning, she reported to Skyward Airlines training facility, a place she once saw as just a workspace, now transformed into a classroom of humility and learning. The Cole Initiative had already begun rolling out modules, empathy exercises, real-life scenario analyses, and reflective discussions that challenged every preconceived notion she had carried. At first, she felt exposed. Every comment, every reaction, every hesitating glance of a peer reminded her of her past mistake. But slowly, that discomfort turned into understanding. She learned to listen without judgment, to consider the humanity behind every passenger, every colleague, every interaction. She began to see how even the smallest gestures, a smile, a calm tone, a polite word, could ripple outward, changing the day for someone who had little control over their circumstances. One afternoon, Darius visited the training facility for a follow-up session. He moved through the room quietly, observing. When his gaze fell on Rebecca, she straightened instinctively, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation coursing through her. Ms. Hale, he said, his voice calm but carrying authority, how's it going? Rebecca swallowed hard. It's eye-opening. I didn't realize how much I carried without thinking. This program, it's changing the way I see people. Darius nodded, satisfied. Good. Awareness is the first step. Change comes next. During the session, She participated in exercises designed to simulate the passenger experience. Actors and volunteers posed as difficult travelers, testing patience, empathy, and problem-solving under stress. She found herself reacting differently, calmly, politely, and without condescension. Her peers noticed, some whispering among themselves, impressed by the transformation. Later, Darius gathered the group together for a closing discussion. "Respect is not about hierarchy," he began. "It's not about who earns more money, flies first class, or holds a title. Respect is about seeing the human being in front of you. Today, each of you has had the chance to experience that perspective." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then he looked directly at Rebecca. "You've had your moment. How you carry it forward will define the next chapter for yourself, for this airline, and for everyone who watches what we do." Rebecca's throat tightened. "I understand, sir. I won't forget it." Outside the classroom, reporters had gathered, hoping to capture a story of confrontation or scandal. Instead, they found transformation. Skyward Airlines issued a press release highlighting the collaboration with the Coal Initiative, emphasizing accountability, growth, and systemic change. The narrative shifted from humiliation to redemption, from shame to inspiration. Social media followed suit. Clips of the training sessions went viral, showing flight attendants engaging in role play, listening intently, and learning the principles Darius emphasized. Hashtags like Coal Initiative, Respect Matters, and Learn and Grow dominated trending lists. Rebecca, once the symbol of a viral mistake, became a symbol of transformation. Colleagues sought her advice, passengers complimented her renewed professionalism, and even the public admired her willingness to change. Every day, she reflected on that moment in first class, the kick of the suitcase, the calm, unwavering gaze of Darius Cole, and the single phone call that altered the course of her career. One evening, after a long day of training sessions, Rebecca sat alone in her apartment. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages of encouragement from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had heard her story. She paused on a video, a short clip of Darius speaking during a session. "Real power isn't measured by what you can take from someone. It's measured by how much you can teach, uplift, and inspire them." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of shame. They were tears of clarity. She had been given a second chance, not because she deserved it, but because someone believed in the possibility of growth. Weeks later, Rebecca returned to her regular flights, but something had changed. Her movements were confident but gentle. Her tone was firm but kind. She handled passengers with a patience she never knew she had. Small gestures, helping a mother with a stroller, greeting a nervous traveler warmly, offering assistance without assumption, became second nature. Darius, meanwhile, monitored the program's rollout. From his office, he saw how one moment of disrespect had sparked a movement, how accountability had led to transformation, and how leadership wasn't about punishment, it was about guidance. And in that quiet observation, he allowed himself a small smile. Change was slow but real, and it had begun. For Rebecca Hale, the woman who had once kicked a black CEO's suitcase in a moment of arrogance, life had offered a new beginning. One phone call had ended her humiliation, but her willingness to learn had ensured a future of respect, awareness, and purpose. Sometimes redemption isn't given. It's earned through the courage to change, to face your mistakes, and to walk forward differently. And that was exactly what she intended to do. Months had passed since the incident on Flight 308, but its impact was far from over. What began as a viral video and a public scandal had evolved into a movement, reaching far beyond the walls of Skyward Airlines. The Coal Initiative was now a fully implemented program, not only within the airline, but as a model for other companies nationwide. The story of one flight attendant and one CEO had become a case study in empathy, accountability, and corporate responsibility. Rebecca Hale had transformed into a respected trainer, leading workshops for new flight attendants and guiding seasoned staff through exercises on perspective-taking and bias awareness. Her colleagues watched her with renewed admiration. She had become a living example of what growth looked like, someone who admitted her mistakes, accepted responsibility, and actively worked to prevent others from making the same ones. Darius Cole, meanwhile, continued to monitor the initiative, not as a CEO seeking attention, but as a mentor and advocate for change. He partnered with airlines, corporations, and even educational institutions to expand the program's reach. He spoke at conferences, giving lectures on leadership, respect, and systemic change. Each speech included the story of Flight 308, not as a tale of vengeance or humiliation, but as a lesson in the power of accountability and measured action. Social media continued to highlight the transformation. Viral posts no longer mocked a flight attendant's mistake. They celebrated the lessons learned. One post showed Rebecca conducting a training session, captioned, "From mistake to mentor, how one woman turned a moment of arrogance into a lifetime of influence." Psychologists and corporate trainers cited the incident in articles about leadership and empathy. News outlets highlighted the importance of proactive education over reactive punishment. The narrative had shifted entirely from public shamming to public growth. Even within Skyward Airlines, the change was palpable. Passenger complaints declined, employee satisfaction improved, and a culture of accountability slowly took root. Managers who had once tolerated indifference now emphasized respect, inclusivity, and awareness. Employees spoke openly about learning from mistakes rather than hiding them. The airline had become, in its own small way, a model for other organizations striving to change systemic behavior. Outside the corporate world, individuals shared personal stories inspired by Darius Cole's approach. Stories emerged of people confronting their biases, admitting wrongdoing, and taking steps to make amends in workplaces, schools, and communities. The ripple effect spread far beyond the airline industry. Rebecca herself often reflected on the journey. She thought about that moment on the plane, the suitcase kicked, the quiet authority of Darius, the call that followed. Without it, her career might have ended in disgrace. Without the opportunity to learn, she might have continued making the same assumptions every day. But instead, she had been given a chance to transform not just herself, but those around her. In quiet moments, she would remember Darius's words during the training sessions. Real power isn't measured by what you can take from someone. It's measured by how much you can teach, uplift, and inspire them. Those words had become a mantra, guiding her actions both in the air and on the ground. She had learned that mistakes were inevitable, but growth was a choice, one she would make every single day. Darius, watching from afar, understood that true change required patience and persistence. The world didn't shift overnight, but it could shift steadily, one person, one lesson, one interaction at a time. Flight 308 had been the spark, a moment that exposed arrogance, bias, and disrespect. But the program, the lessons, and the accountability it fostered were the fire that would light the way forward. As news stories continued to highlight the transformation, Rebecca received a message from a young flight attendant she had mentored. "I just wanted to thank you. I had a passenger today who reminded me of what you taught me. I stayed calm, listened, and resolved the situation without judgment. It worked, and it felt right." Rebecca smiled, a quiet warmth filling her chest. She replied, "That's exactly why we do this. One interaction, one choice at a time." And in that, she realized the truth. The incident that once threatened to destroy her career had instead given her purpose. The ripple of one moment had spread into a wave of awareness, touching lives she might never even see. Darius continued to champion the cause, but he knew it wasn't about him anymore. It was about creating systems that promoted respect, awareness, and empathy in a world that often forgot both. Flight 308 was over, but its lessons would endure. And every person who chose to act differently because of that one flight carried the story forward. In the end, the story wasn't about a kicked suitcase, a viral video, or even a public figure's influence. It was about humanity, how accountability, guidance, and the willingness to learn could transform mistakes into milestones. And that transformation, Darius and Rebecca realized, was the most powerful force of all. As the story of Flight 308 and the Cole Initiative comes to a close, It's clear that what began as a tense and uncomfortable moment evolved into a powerful lesson about respect, accountability, and growth. From a viral incident that could have destroyed careers to a transformative initiative that reshaped corporate culture, this story reminds us that mistakes do not define us, our response to them does. Darius Cole exemplified this principle. Rather than seeking revenge or public shamming, he chose calm, deliberate action. One phone call, guided by principle rather than anger, ignited a movement for empathy and accountability. He turned what could have been a humiliating encounter into an opportunity for systemic change. Through his leadership, Skyward Airlines not only corrected a wrong but implemented practices that will influence thousands of employees and millions of passengers for years to come. Rebecca Hale, once at the center of public criticism, became a symbol of personal growth and redemption. Her willingness to confront her own behavior, to learn, and to actively participate in change demonstrates that even in moments of failure, there is potential for transformation. She took accountability seriously, and in doing so, helped others see the value of humility, empathy, and understanding. The ripple effect of this story extends far beyond the airline industry. It serves as a reminder that every action, no matter how small, can have far-reaching consequences. It also shows that real leadership is not about authority or position, but about responsibility and integrity. The Cole Initiative became a blueprint for organizations and individuals alike, proving that accountability coupled with education can create profound, lasting change. For all of us watching this story unfold, there is a lesson. Moments of tension and conflict are inevitable. People will make mistakes, assumptions will be formed, and biases will surface. But these moments offer us choices. We can react with anger, we can ignore them, or we can choose the harder path of accountability, reflection, and proactive change. The latter is what leads to real impact. If there is one takeaway, it is this: respect is not granted automatically. It must be practiced, taught, and nurtured in every interaction, on every flight, in every boardroom. It begins with awareness, flourishes through empathy, and solidifies with consistent action. And sometimes, as in this story, it begins with a single phone call and a willingness to make things right. Before we close, I want to leave you with a question. In your daily life, how often do you pause to consider the humanity of those around you? Are you quick to judge, or do you take a moment to understand? The answers to these questions may determine the difference between conflict and growth, between regret and redemption. Thank you for joining me today on Swift Tale. If you are visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this story. How would you have reacted if you were in Darius Cole's or Rebecca Hale's shoes? Your insights can inspire others, just like this story has inspired us. Remember, stories like this aren't just entertainment, they are lessons. They remind us that change is possible, that accountability matters, and that growth often begins with a single, deliberate choice. So take this story with you, reflect on it, discuss it, and act on it. Because the world is full of moments like Flight 308, and it is up to us to choose how we respond. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next story here on Swift Tale, where every tale has a lesson, and every lesson has the power to change lives.